Thank you very
Thanks.
much, Stephen. That's very interesting to see how there is overlapping between Salafist and modernist, although for different reasons. But this probably will lead us to another question. Do you think who is probably closer to modernity, who is more can be in more alignment with modernization? Would it be Salafist or traditionalist? So people will say, okay, Salafi are usually anti-modernity, usually very conservative. Some people will say the radical word. I mean, they are very radical people. But it seems for me that you are saying actually they are more pro modernity than the traditional Islam or popular Islam with its Sufism, superstitions, or whatever people will call that. Or what's your input on that? Who is probably more inclined to adopt modernity, traditional Islam or Salafism?
I don't want to give certificates of modernity to anyone. I think there are, I'm not absolutely sure what modernity is and how good a thing it is. So at this point, I'm like, I think there's different paths. I think there's not one conception. I think these different people have different understandings of what modernity could be. So in the early 20th century, there is one, this is under the colonial period, where, in the end, I think to the modernists of the early 20th century, there is one understanding, which is basically, Europe in a sense. But then at the same time, it is their perspective, not mine. And I think in a sense, a lot of people have looked at this and tried to project European history onto this. So, if you want to go up, if you want to push the projection of European history onto this, like I did, so basically you have the Calvinists, the Lutherans, and the Catholics. And the three of them are trying to be modern in Europe for the last few centuries. So maybe the traditionalists would be the Catholics. I'm sorry about the comparison, but you know what I mean. In a sense, there's one group that is attached to what it sees as traditions that are non-negotiable. There's one that wants to break with tradition, one that wants to break with tradition with some aspiration, and another one's different aspiration. I'm not saying they're the same. I'm not saying that. But it's the same kind of debate. So if you're asking me, who's more modern between the Catholics, the Lutherans,
I don't know how you would answer that.
It's like, these people have different conceptions of what they think. I think in a sense, everyone in a sense they're all man of their times. Some of them just see the preservation of tradition as something good. The other ones see it as bad. The other ones see it as sinful. but in a sense, and of course, that rhetoric of modernity is probably more used by people from Muhammad Abdul. But yeah, I don't think it's like one is more modern than the other. I think they're all men of their times.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting way of answering my question. So if we again want to follow up on the same issue, so the relationship or the overlapping, the common ground between Salafist and modernist, you see that, or you say that there was some common ground between both of them. Their hatred to Sufism, their hatred to Mawlid, and so on. But what about the common ground between Salafist and traditionalist? So I think this is something very important. So for example, Usama Sayyid, people know him as Usama al-Azhari probably. You interviewed him in your book, and now he became the Minister of Religious Affairs in Egypt. He has this book about Jamharat Ulama al-Azhar, and in the first volume, he spoke about al-Manhaj al-Azhari, the Azhari methodology. And some of the points are quite interesting that he added to what he calls as Manhaj al-Azhari, that like music is not prohibited, that photography is not prohibited, that triple talaq is considered one talaq, which is Ibn Taymiyyah actually opinion. But we don't notice such juristic debates between Salafists and official Azhari in the beginning of the first century. So your first chapter, for example, it doesn't mention clashes between traditionalism and between Azharis and Salafists in regard to beard, for example, lihya, or in regard to niqab. And here it's really interesting to see the shift, not in the Salafi grammar, I will use Urdun or word, but actually on the official Azhari traditionalism understanding of these juristic issues. So do you agree that there was a very wide space, there's a common ground, there was a common ground between Salafism and modernists, reformists, whatever you will call them. There was also a common ground between Salafists and traditionalists when it comes to juristic debates. That common ground is no longer found in this time, but probably in the early. So, for example, Yusuf al-Dijwi, you mentioned in your first book the debate about Yusuf al-Dijwi and the al-Fiqhi and the debate about Sufism and so on, Bakhit al-Muti'. But if you look from juristic perspective, you'll find that al-Dijwi in his fatwa say about niqab is obligatory for sure. Something that modern Azharis or current Azharis will never say. And he would say it's obligatory by consensus, ijma'. Because even people say that's not obligatory in the time of fitna, as in our time, it should be obligatory. So there is a consensus on that. So such kind of so-called conservative fatwas was very interesting to see how Salafists actually or how traditional Islam agreed with Salafists in that in these issues. Abu al-Fadl al-Jizawi, the Sheikh al-Azhar, he has like these fatwas prohibiting reciting or playing Quran in phonograph. So he said, no, we cannot play Quran on phonograph because phonograph is used for dirty, for filthy issues, for people who are not pious. Sheikh, if I remember well, Al-Khidr Hussein has another critique of mixing between male and female in education, males and females in education, which looks very similar, like a Salafi rhetoric, but actually from a very traditional official Azharis, which is not the same as it is now. So do you think this categorization, when it comes to juristic, I'm Islamic law student at least, so I'm more interested in juristic debates. So to what extent do you think there was a common ground, the same as there was a common ground between Salafists and reformists when it comes to the critique of the Sufism? There was also a common ground between Salafists and official Muslim scholars, Azharis, when it comes to the critique to reformists. So when it comes to, for example, religious diversity, I mean, I'm sure people, traditional Azhari will be very critical to like joining the celebration of the Christmas, or I don't know one specific matter about that, but I'm sure they will be very skeptical about allowing it.
Actually, that's a very good question. In that period, I mean, you're right. They had many things they would agree on. So they disagree on Mawlid, and they disagree on the notion of bid'ah, and can there be bid'ah hasana, and all of this is the big question. And that basically is most of their writing. So, and I think that basically absorbs all their energies. Like, this is just what they just keep on writing about this against each other. I think the Al-Azhar and these traditions of Al-Azhar, they're really annoyed by these Salafis. And some of the Salafis are really offensive. I mean, I talk in the book about Al-Qasimi, right? Abdullah Al-Qasimi. So you have this young student. This is a very interesting story, by the way. So Al-Qasimi is this young student. He's actually from Saudi Arabia. Comes to study in Al-Azhar in 1927. Okay, we're in 1927, 100 years ago. Comes with a scholarship to study at Al-Azhar. And apparently he's a very smart guy, very, bold in many ways. And so he comes with this Saudi religious education. Studies at Al-Azhar, and after a while he's like, I hate this. What are they teaching me? It's wrong. And he's a third-year student, and he starts to write a book against Al-Azhar. So he has a couple of books. One is called Shuyukh al-Azhar wa Ziyada al-Islam. The other one, I forgot and then he writes a book against one of the main sheikhs of al-Azhar at the time, was Yusuf al-Dijwi. Al-Dhalamat al-Najdiyya, as Dhalamat. So like, I mean, basically, you know, he's just like, he's a third year student. It's like if you third year students at Utiga, you just start to write pamphlets against your professors, you know, not telling you to do this. But, you know, and of course he's backed by the whole Salafi establishment in Egypt at the time. And so that kind of fuels the polemics. It's very bad in terms of writing. Right? They don't, so I think they're so opposed to each other on these questions that they don't really get to see where they see eye to eye. You know, the polemic is really, really strong. It's a very virulent debate. But later on, to respond to your question, I see this later on. It would be too long? No. I see this later on. So not at the time. I don't see any clear case of collaboration. But of course, when like students of Muhammad Abdul, for instance, start to write books about the liberation of women, of course the traditionalists and the Salafis would agree against this. Most of them. So most of them would agree against this. But I don't see clear cases in which we see this kind of trans collaboration. Happens later on, and I mentioned this in the book, but long later on, when in 2011, Muhammad Yusuf Ibrahim starts to publish these books in which he tries to dig into al-Azhar on different issues, to look for fatwas by Azharis who actually agree with the Salafi point of view. And you see him coming up with a lot of fatwas by Azharis on niqab, exactly. You know, and he says, you know, oh, that means al-Azhar. This is also very reductive because he's taking just certain issues which they have to agree on, including traditionalists. Exactly, early Azharis, including traditionalists, and he enrolls them in his campaign to say that, oh, Azhar, this Azhari shaykh said the same thing as us. But again, this is like a late agree, but I don't really see it happening at the time.
And this is the point actually, that this happened later on because probably of the triumph, because of the victory of the reformist group within Al-Azhar itself. So the wing of reformers, the wing of Muhammad Abdul became victorious. I'm sorry, Buri, I didn't notice that we are running out of time. I'm very sorry. So actually I raised 2 points out of 10. So, but I will stop here because I think because I think there may be people raising their hands. I'm sorry, I didn't notice that. Thank you.
We'll have to go for coffee then for the 8 other points. I'm eager to know them.